And if you hold a phone and hit a man with it, he didn't take much of that. Phones are very, very good weapons. You think of like a Yawara or a Kubotan,
Yes.
your phone is 10 times better than any Kubotan you'll ever hold. And you
Right.
legitimately have it with you all the time.
Well, first off, good morning. Good morning. Well, sorry, good morning for me, or good afternoon for me. What time is it where you are right now, Tommy?
It's just about 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it's heading more towards the evening for you then.
Yeah.
All right, no problem, no problem. Wonderful. I'm still trying to get the time schedules and stuff in my head and everything. But I want to thank you very much for your time, for being able to meet with us and be able to share with our viewers as well. For those of you who do not know, well, first off, welcome to another episode of Into the Dojo. My name is David. I'm standing in for Manny, who's unfortunately unable to meet with us due to the time difference. But I can guarantee everybody that today's going to be a wonderful show. We have here the wonderful Mr. Tommy Moore, who is going to be talking to us a little bit about his exploits in Bartitsu, his experience with martial arts, and we're just going to pick his brain on a few things, martial arts and philosophy related. How you feeling today, Tommy?
I'm feeling really good. So today's been a jam-packed day. I've been doing sambo wrestling. I've been boxing. I've been boxing with some Cuban Olympians. So I am beat today.
Oh man, I can only imagine how that. I mean, that's like you going from grappling to kind of an MMA to you're just bouncing all over the place today.
I mean, I've never felt more out of shape and middle-aged than I have in a long time.
Well, you could have fooled me. You definitely could have fooled me. But again, thank you for being able to spend the time today. I'm familiar with your work specifically because of the videos that I've been able to find on YouTube with the BartitsuLab, and Bartitsu has always been an interest to me specifically because of the fact that it's just a very unique system from blended systems that I've heard of in the past, and especially with its history. So just to start off, if I may, the first question I really want to just dive right into, just tell the viewers a bit about yourself and your martial arts experience as far as where you've been and where you've touched on.
Okay, perfect. So I started boxing very young. So I was taken to boxing gym by my dad when I was about 5. So I've been boxing ever since then. So the kind of the continuous martial line that runs through my life, it has been that. And then when I was 7, I was also taken to judo. So for much of my early life, boxing and judo were my main things. And I think I was quite fortunate in that because they've escaped some of the less good elements that have crept into other martial arts. Typically, martial sports have kept on they tend to be pretty ethical clubs. You get what you pay for. You get boxed, you get judo. You get precisely what you pay for.
Right.
And you get good experience in hitting and being hit and throwing and being thrown.
Right.
And then when I was about 15, I started to just add in ancillary things. So Thai boxing, did Thai boxing for a number of years, Jeet Kune Do, and then just other systems. You know how it is when I always think people's passion often isn't karate or jujitsu or judo. It's martial arts. So it would be very rare to find that many people that enjoy just the one. As soon as you do one, you tend to diverge. Even people that, let's say, do karate, they'll pick up Shotokan and then they'll be like, oh, those Uchiryu guys, they look pretty cool, or the Goju guys, or how badass is it to be a Kyokushin guy? That tends to happen. And so for me, I just do that. I call it martial nomadism. I like to travel.
Right.
I've traveled. I've been in the car for about 7 hours today, and trained for about 10 hours, and it's only 5 o'clock. So you've got to get off your backside and go out there, because good teachers, they're not going to come out of the ether. You have to go, and that's always been my philosophy. So I'll go train with everybody. I'm not very partisan. So I love traditional martial arts. So I'm studying Jiu-Jitsu. So I will put on my skirt, I will put on my gi, and I will go be samurai. But by the same token, I'll go to a gym that looks like it's straight out of 1950s Philadelphia, and I'll do catch wrestling. It's
nice.
It's you've got, for me, I love martial sports. martial arts and combatives, reality-based self-defense. And I see them as, you know, three sides of the same triangle. And
Right.
if you really want the full martial picture, it's good to capture them all. Each one of them adds a benefit that can't be replicated elsewhere. So I've always enjoyed that. You know, I've always been on the more practical side of the art. So I'm, you know, I like to get a bit rough and tumble with it. That's how I am. But then I'm not judgmental of arts that are a bit more sedate or sedentary, because people have different lifestyles, different lives, different physicalities. They all have value if they have value to you. But yeah, I've done it my entire life. I spend a lot of my time teaching, but I'm very adamant to spend a lot of my time training too. You can almost teach too much, and then
you forget the applications and stuff like that.
Exactly. But I always, if anything else goes wrong in my life, I've always stuck to the boxing and judo. They've been absolute
baseline.
Yeah.
Nice. That's one thing that I really enjoy, like, especially with my own journey. I've been trying to really, like, I say I've kind of dipped my toe in teaching a slight bit. Manny has always been trying to push me to do more, but definitely being able to that nomadism, I feel is definitely a good thing to really add to any type of like martial arts lifestyle. You want to be able to study around, unless, like you said, you want to like stick to one specific type of practice, whether it's just more like a internal practice, or maybe a more softer art that doesn't, you know, have you run it off getting punched in the face like in the ring or something like that, you know. It's definitely good to have that experience, but I mean, it's always been to each their own in my own personal respect, but definitely being able to search around helps to widen that experience. So that actually leads me into my next thing. So what brought you to, I guess, make your home in Bartitsu? Well, first off, explain, I guess, to our viewers what Bartitsu is, first of all, and then I guess kind of talk about what led you into, you know, that realm.
So to give a potted history of Bartitsu, so in the late 1800s, a British railway engineer called Edward William Barton Wright, he goes over to Japan, and he studies traditional jiu-jitsu, traditional kind of stand-up formal jiu-jitsu. It's probably that, you know, and probably most people watching this are pretty clued up on martial arts, so they'll have an idea in their mind of the type of jiu-jitsu there. And he comes back to London, and London's in the midst of essentially a big crime epidemic. So Victorian London is it's in social chaos. You know, people, there's extreme wealth and there's extreme poverty. And increasingly, those that are in extreme poverty are, you know, I suppose for the gentleman's perspective, are having more and more audacity to attack, to rob, to steal. And Barton Wright, he's a clever businessman, and he notices that, you know, London's in a state of moral panic, fear, that everyone's worried they're going to be attacked. The people that are worried about being attacked are typically at the posher end of the scale. They've got a bit more money. And he realizes that there's a need for a product in the market of realistic self-defense for people that are willing and can afford to put their time in. So he brings together these excellent coaches in other systems. So he brings over from Japan some of the best jujitsuka, you know, Yuki Otani, Yurineshi. You know, these are legit,
the cream of the crop.
Yeah, you know, you're looking at also at this point, you've got primordial judo as well. So you've got jiu-jitsu and what is to be judo, and what has just become judo. He brings together Arnaud Chapillon, he's a Swiss wrestler. He's a Greco-Roman wrestler. He's that muscly. He looks like a cloud. You know, he's that kind of guy. Big kind of circus showman, mustache, strength.
The traditional, like, strong man.
Exactly what you picture in your mind. He brings in Pierre Vigny. Pierre Vigny is a Swiss military instructor, and he teaches savate, which is a French kickboxing system. And also the use of the cane. And he's also got a variety of different boxing instructors, and even fencing instructors use the same hall. And so he brings in this cast of people together, and he essentially introduces the Bartitsu training system. You know, it's hard really to call Bartitsu an art. It's more of a process. Because what you would do is you would come to the Bartitsu training hall, and you would spend time getting good at savate, at jiu-jitsu, at wrestling, individually. And then Barton Wright, once you'd really kind of reached a level of proficiency, would help you knit together what of those systems is right for you and your body type and your archetypes and your needs. So if you think about it, it's almost like a prototype version of what you might get at an MMA gym. You'd have a very good BJJ coach, a very good striking coach, a very good, a nutritionist. You'd have all these people. And that's what Barton Wright's doing. He's made this amazing club underground. It's white tiled. It's beautiful, immaculately beautiful. And people go there to learn self-defense. And it's one of the first instances where we can see different martial systems from all around the world being put together for a specific purpose, for self-defense. It's a very specific purpose. Now, unfortunately for Barton Wright, when you bring in the best people in the world, they tend to disagree and fall out, because with big talent becomes big ego. And eventually instructors fell out with instructors, and people realized they could make more money if they set off on their own. And the club, it didn't last very long, but the experiment did, and it spawned loads of different experimentations in martial arts at that time. And the ramifications of that have been very, very, very large. But it's the first example, pre-William Fairbairn, pre-Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune Do, pre-Kaji Kembo, pre pretty much every other amalgamated system. You've got Bartitsu, and it's a lot of talent to bring together that process. And so that happened, and there's a movement called HEMA, Historical European Martial Arts. And people go and they look at manuscripts and documents and sources, and they resurrect things like sword fighting, spear fighting from Europe.
I've heard of this,
and people do it very, very good. There is a lot more that you can find out about how Europeans sword fought than you can find out from the Japanese. For one, illustrations.
Like using a katana or something like that.
Yeah, people illustrated, which, in Japan, you've got stick drawings. In the Kenjutsu manuals, they're stick drawings, and they're written instructions. In the European manuals, you've got big, luscious, lucid illustrations and drawings of each technique. There are hundreds of HEMA manuals out there. And part of that experiment, there's also a lot of unarmed HEMA manuals of wrestling, of boxing, of other kind of European Western systems. And Bartitsu is one of those that people started to revive. And I came across it because I was doing a bit of stuff in medieval longsword, and I felt that a lot of the people practicing it, their heart was in the right place, but they were more academics than practical martial artists. So there were people that were primarily interested in history, but didn't have the martial skill. So they'd reconstruct it, but it didn't have the same bite, the same flavor. And I looked and I'm like, well, boxing, judo. I've been doing Savat for 5, 6, 7 years. A lot of the constituent elements that were in Bartitsu,
you
I'm
already
good at. So I thought, I could pick this up, and I could try and bring this to people in a way I think it would have originally been brought to them, because a lot of the people that were practicing it more academically, part of the fun is dressing up in the old clothes and doing that kind of larpy cosplay thing, which is cool. And I sometimes do that because people dig it, and they come.
I was
going
to ask, do you guys normally train in suits?
But it's one of those things where those people, because we look back and we look at those photographs, and they're in clothes we'd deem silly. They're all legit killers. If you look at Yuki Otani, small Japanese wrestler, would go around Britain at the circus shows and the hall shows, and he would take on the best, the biggest wrestlers. And there were some big, strong dudes there.
Back in those days.
In front of their home audience. Do you think they want to get beaten up by a little Japanese man? Do they? Hell, they do not. So they, they're putting it on the line. These Bartitsu touring shows, they take them around and take on all comers, and they do well. And so for me, I saw that. I thought I could bring something a bit more combative to that practice and how it's brought back, and that's what I did, and that's the flavor of my particular Bartitsu club. But in the community, we like to say it's an open source martial art. No one owns it. It technically died because there's no living lineage of Bartitsu. So anyone that pieces together fragments of it, it's their own thing, so some people it's more for performance and they like to go to, say, Victorian shows and do that kind of stuff. Some people are a bit more like me and they want to make sure that everyone can box, wrestle, stick fight. But everyone's interpretation is very much legitimate in its own right. And I run my club, I call it the BartitsuLab, and part of my approach is to make it as close to that original model as possible. So I like to bring in guest coaches, guest instructors. It's a system that's built on having lots of instructors, not one. And that's the kind of process that I like to play with. My job is to look at a student and facilitate for their needs, for their body type, for what they want. What kind of combination of things should they go for? And how could they stitch it together? And that's kind of my job in that particular club environment.
Right. And I've just seen just the way that it is. I was going to ask, how do you guys piece together is there any political drama amidst all of that, as far as whose Bartitsu is the truest, or is it really more so just a community of you all just kind of piecing together that lost history?
Yeah. So there's three kind of phrases in the community. So the first is that people teach what's known as canonical Bartitsu. And what that means is the Bartitsu that is in print by Barton Wright. So he did a series of magazine articles that are illustrated. And so if you teach canonical Bartitsu, you only teach what is shown in those magazine articles. It comes to a circa maybe 30, 35 techniques. But you can very legitimately say those were part of Bartitsu. There's Neo Bartitsu, which is where people take, there's lots of manuals of those arts at kind of the same time. So let's say there's a French savate manual from 1880. People would take that, look at what's in it, and add that into the practice, because it would be a reasonable assumption to say, well, that's what savate looked like, that's what boxing looked like at that time, that's what judo looked like at that time. And those are a lot more in depth. The Victorian period had thousands of martial arts books, huge amounts of martial arts books. So it's quite easy to pull together. And the definition modern Bartitsu is canonical plus neo plus whatever that particular instructor does in the spirit of that experiment. So if you think of things like Jeet Kune Do, it's in the spirit of that. In modern Bartitsu, you may decide, actually, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a good addition to this, or this type of striking. And Thai boxing might be a valid addition. And if Thai boxing was around in the 1890s, maybe that would have been added too, if that would have been aware and available. So those are the kind of three broad definitions: canonical, neo, and modern. Then no one's ever written these down, but they're the kind of accepted rules of the community.
Interesting. So it's really just, again, it just sounds like there are, like you said, you have the three sets, but it's more so just everybody kind of building and adding on to like a lost scroll per se of Bartitsu techniques, which is actually quite interesting. Usually I notice one of the things that I always wondered was there any type of major political issues involved with the schools of Bartitsu practitioners, but it kind of just sounds like you all are historians trying to piece together the truth of Bartitsu. Would you agree with that? That's a way to describe
exactly. It's too niche for there to be that many arguments. It's people that are into it are motivated. They're typically motivated by history, culture, and the martial side, and those three things they like to put together. A lot of people like to explore their martial history wherever they're from. People like to think, oh, is this a thing that my ancestors could have done? That's quite a cool feeling for people to have. And that in the HEMA community, in lots of other martial communities too, that's something that drives a lot of people. Could my great ancestor have fought the French at Agincourt? How might he have used a sword? How might he have used a spear? It's an exciting thought to have for a lot of people. But yeah, I think most people are pretty easy to get on with. There's no real hierarchy, and to be honest, because it is so niche, there's no money in it. So if there's no money, there's no arguments, which is a good place to be. If you've got an art which is suddenly very popular, let's say Krav Maga suddenly gets very popular, then everybody starts to hate everybody, and everybody's illegitimate. It's true.
It is
You
true. No, it is true. That's why I'm laughing, because it's like I understand like there's so many different like Manny and I could go on and on about like our understandings of crowd. We've heard, like, we've been in the martial arts community a while. We've heard varied opinions about Krav Maga. So whatever I hear, the first thing I think of is all those like conversations that we've had, like popping up in my head, like all the political drama that happens within the Krav Maga world. So hearing that Bartitsu is actually quite different from that. It's more passion driven, it sounds like, rather than, I'm going to make money off of this branch and use the name of the founder to do this and that, or something. That it's more so like we're all passionate about this specific art form, and we would rather spread the knowledge than try to make money off of it, as spreading the knowledge would be the most important thing, considering its past.
Yeah. This is an interesting thing. So for example, you take a system like Krav Maga or any modern reality-based self-defense system. And in those systems, a lot of people are taught to punch. And in those systems, a lot of the punching is based off boxing.
Right.
And the guys will put on boxing gloves and they will box in the way that people today box. Now, a fundamental problem with that is that if you're training a self-defense system, whose primary goal is self-defense like Krav Maga, and you're having people punch in a modern gloved boxing fashion, that's not necessarily indicative of clever ways to punch people when you don't have a glove on.
Right.
Whereas if you look at something like Bartitsu, a lot of the boxing is from the bare knuckle era, where people are boxing without gloves. So a lot of the striking is still boxing, but it's boxing designed for no gloves or very, very light gloves. You're talking basically having socks on your hand. I mean, they're very light
old
gloves.
School boxing gloves.
Old school gloves. And suddenly you start to realize that if I look at something like Bartitsu, it's teaching people how to box. It's designed for self-defense, and the boxing is bare knuckle, therefore optimized fully for boxing for self-defense. Whereas in a modern reality-based system, they will put on gloves and they might box as part of, say, Krav Maga.
Right.
But the value of that for a student, when they have to be able to hit someone's face for real and skin meets skin, and it's not quite what they thought.
Right.
That's you don't want then to be the point where you realize maybe I should have done something a little bit
differently. Right.
So I think that's one thing that we have, which is useful to all martial artists, really, in that it comes from a time of ungloved combat sport. And that's fundamental. An ungloved combat sport has a lot more crossover to ungloved self-defense than gloved combat sports.
Right.
In the same way, if Kyokushin allowed face contact, it would be a very good crossover for people wanting to learn to use striking for self-defense, because you get used to how that works and how it feels to hit a face and what hurts and what doesn't. So ungloved contact sports are essentially what makes up Bartitsu, and what makes its model quite unique, I would say.
I like that opinion. That's pretty cool. I mean, it's also honestly very, I would say, very straightforward in the way that it really applies, like the whole understanding of the difference between sports and combatives as far as martial arts. Because a lot of people think about martial arts and they think of mostly the glove sport, the boxing, MMA, and such like that. And then a lot of people tend to fall short in thinking, like, if I have to use this, like, for example, I used to teach boxing fitness. And one of the things that I've noticed is, like, when you're boxing, you have the gloves on, certain guards that allow you to do certain things. But when the boxing glove is taken off of your hand and you need to be able to do that same guard, it doesn't cover as much as your hand would with the boxing glove. So those things would have to be modified with those things as well. So that makes sense. Let me see here. Let me look at my just want to make sure I keep on this. So speaking of use as well in the world of Bartitsu, I actually have a question for you that I thought was very interesting. You mentioned before that cane fighting was something that was like one of the staple arts as far as in traditional Bartitsu when it was created. So, well, first off, do you believe, at least, I mean, with most people, they would believe that, arts with Bartitsu's similar history, there will be certain parts of the art that would, fall away or maybe be considered less functional in this modern day. Would you say that Bartitsu has aspects of that that would be considered archaic nowadays? And if they aren't considered archaic, how does Bartitsu really incorporate those into modern day self-defense? For example, like speaking like cane fighting, for example, how would that be applied?
So a good example. So with cane fighting, you think of the cane and the people that were originally using Bartitsu, and they were typically of the wealthier end of the spectrum. Because let's be honest, people at the poor end of the spectrum, they're pretty tough anyway, and they know how to fight. You know, like if you've had to grow up in a struggle, you don't need that many lessons in self-defense. If you are an overly pampered lordling, then you need toughening up. But one of the things, a great example would be that the cane back then is your everyday carry. You wouldn't be seen outside the house with your cane. And you would be foolish to not have trained with the cane, because it's a thing that culturally you would have had all the time. It would be a social embarrassment for you to be seen without it. And it's a good weapon. You know, a cane is a good weapon, because the Bartitsu cane, unlike something like an eskrima stick, the Bartitsu cane is relatively flexible and has a metal head to it. It's more like a mace than
I was about to say like a shillelagh or a mace or something like that.
Yeah, think of it. So like a refined shillelagh. You know, it's a weighted end, which means that if you hit a man with it, you only need to hit him once. But that's an example of everyday carry. Now, if you look at something, if you were to do canonical Bartitsu or neo Bartitsu, then yes, you should train in those cane techniques because you want to do it as it was. For me, in my modern Bartitsu, I'd say, right, well, if the cane is the gentleman's everyday carry, then what is today's gentleman's everyday carry? What would a normal human have with them all the time? And how could I use that for a defensive object? So in my particular practice, I look at, if the principle is using what you carry every day, and people no longer carry canes, what do they carry? And so I spend a lot of time, for example, using what you Americans would call a cell phone. We call mobile phones, but everybody carries a phone, everybody. And they are made of toughened glass and hard plastics. And if you hold a phone and hit a man with it, he didn't take much of that. You know, that phones are very, very good weapons. You think of like a Yawara or a Kubatan, you know, your phone is 10 times better than any Kubatan you'll ever hold. And you legitimately have it with you all the time. And you will have it with you when you're attacked, because if you're at the ATM, if you are paying for things with tap and go, if you're lost and looking for maps, if you're a tourist being stupid looking for translations, odds are when you're focused on your phone, that's when someone will attack you. So learn to defend yourself with this heavy object in your hand. And so that's how I take, say, a principle of Bartitsu, use what you have with you every day, and apply it to a modern context, which is often mobile phones and things like pens too. But, you know, people don't always have a pen. People always have their cell phone, their mobile phone.
Right.
Yeah. Even if it stops working, even if you're lost in the forest, you hold on to that. So you hold on to that. So that's how we do it. So we do practice the cane and we train with the cane, but we also take the stuff in the spirit in which it's meant. You know, people back then weren't doing the cane because it felt novel or cool or weird. It's my cane. It's what I take with me when I go to the shop or when I go to the theater or when I go to the park. There's nothing strange about that, or it's not really. You know, it's just a natural thing. That's what you carried. There's probably a good definition there as well between cane fencing and cane fighting, in that there's a lot of stuff which is between, say, a dispute between two gentlemen. So a dispute between two gentlemen might use the canes, but it would be in quite a fencing format. One versus one person, you know, and it would still, things would be struck in earnest. It would still be a fight, but it would be a fair fight, and it would be done in kind of a fencing-esque manner. But there's also techniques in Bartitsu which are more cane fighting. Typically, if there's more than one person, or if they have other types of weapon, then typically, for example, the cane goes in two hands, and you fight in a slightly different way. So there's some kind of historical differences between cane fencing and cane fighting, but you know, a lot of clubs still do it. It brings in audiences, and people like it because it gives them that historical feel. And it does work very well. You know, I've sparred a lot of very, very good Filipino martial arts guys. I've sparred kendoka.
Okay.
Using the cane because it's a very unorthodox way of using a weapon, which a lot of modern weapon systems are built off Filipino things,
Right.
and
Fixing
they come very
blades.
close to that. Yeah, exactly. They come off the same angles, have the same flows to them. A lot of the angles that come off the Lacan system are very different because it's not a weapon people are used to fighting. It's a 4-foot stick with a heavy weight at the end. It's not a familiar weapon archetype to a lot of people that train weapons.
Okay, so let's see here. So let's say, I guess this one kind of goes more into the hand-to-hand aspect. So I noticed in some of your videos, you showed like the different types of weapons that are generally used in a Bartitsu, I guess a Bartitsu encounter. One, I can't remember the name of it, but it's got like a leather strap and like a little ball on the end that you could use like as kind of like a whip.
Yes.
What was the name of that?
It's called a monkey fist.
A monkey. Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's called a monkey fist, and it's predominantly a maritime weapon. So if you imagine Britain at that time, huge sea power. Britain is built on its navy. It was huge naval power, and that means you've got a lot of guys that are very good making knots, working with ropes. And the monkey fist is essentially a maritime weapon. In that, if you're a sailor and you were coming off on leave on shore, you're probably going to get into some fights because that's what sailors do. And why not have this handy weapon that you can conceal, you can throw away? It's very cheap. It's just a fishing weight and some rope tied together. An experienced sailor could make one in about 90 seconds.
Oh, wow.
So a monkey fist is a simple, cheap, expedient weapon for predominantly people and that are by the sea. Now, London is a very large river, and a lot of goods that would have come in by the sea end up coming to London on proper ships because it's a river deep enough that ocean-going vessels can moor up. So it's a weapon that someone defending themselves in the streets of London would have no doubt come across. And so therefore it's an important weapon to learn how it works in case you ever need to use it yourself, and know the functions of it in case you need to fight a person with that weapon. And I firmly believe that you can't learn to defend a weapon that you don't know how it works. You need to know both sides of the coin.
Right.
If you're going to defend against a knife, you need to know a little bit about how to use a knife. If you're going to defend against a sword, you need to know how a sword works. And if you don't, you end up with martial systems that are flawed because of it. If an art teaches a weapon defense but not an offense, there is a skill gap in there somewhere.
If they ever get the weapon in their hand, they won't know how to use it, but they'll know how to defend it, which I guess some people take as a fine trade-off. I mean, I would say it leaves you a little open, as you said as well. So I'll say, leading into again that practical application of Bartitsu as a modern day martial art. This is actually a question that that both Manny and I had. So for most individuals nowadays, in order for them to be able to utilize, it seems like most people who end up utilizing martial arts or who want to get a more real life aspect of it, they put themselves in a path that makes them have to utilize it potentially on a daily basis, like law enforcement, being a bouncer at a club, for example, which is one I see a lot of common, especially in your younger years. Some people, try being a bouncer at a club as a way to put their art to the test. As an individual that's researched classical martial arts, such as yourself, to resurrect martial arts left in history, what would you think is a good path for modern traditional martial artists to follow, aside from becoming a bouncer or a doorman, to really critically evaluate their delivery system, depending upon whatever art that would be, for self-protection? Like, what would you say, aside from becoming like a guard or something? Like, what would be the best ways for someone to apply their art?
And this really is where combat sports come into their own, because if you're someone that wants to try and see if your stuff works and you become a bouncer, you're always going to be a terrible bouncer or doorman, because you're seeing the door as a place to test, and therefore you're wanting it to go physical, and therefore you're going to get yourself into legal trouble. let's say it does work out and you do test it and you land the best right cross, the best Gyakuzuki you can, and a man splits his head open on the pavement. Well, yes, you might have proven that you've got a good Gyakuzuki, but you then got to sit in prison for 22 years.
Right.
Which is useless to you. You know, I think I always find it hard with professional violence. You know, if you want to test your art, going into professional violence is often not the right way around it, because there's so many legal problems.
Right.
Yeah, I think you have to, if you really want to know if it works, you have to do it against skilled, tough people, because if you can do it against another skilled, tough person, then everyone else is going to be substantially less able. One of the things that people get put off by is the notion that, well, I don't want to compete. And I would counter that you don't need to compete. You just need to train with competitors. You know, you might not need to go and compete in the judo tournament, but go train with the guys that are compete. Go spar, go do randori with the guys that are competing. You know, I think a lot of people get put off competitive arts because they feel that they themselves need to compete, and that's not true. You can still, there is not one boxing club, judo club, hell, taekwondo club that wouldn't, if you're a nice, reasonable person, if you said, look, I want to do some controlled sparring with you guys, could we do something? Most clubs are pretty reasonable, and there'll be some people that will happily oblige you. So, you know, true competition is the best because there's more fear in competition, and it's genuine fear. Things like pressure testing drills that you see in combatives, I'm not so big on those because do you know what I'm talking about? Where people
like the not like, what is it, a compliant opponent kind of situations, right?
Yeah, like where, you know, a guy in a padded helmet will swear at you and push you, and you know that, and it'll all kick off. Now the problem with that is that you know that the guy is Dave, who's an accountant. He's not an angry thug off the street. He's the guy that you talk to after class. So whilst you are play acting the scene, there is no adrenal stress because you know it's Dave and you know it's club. Whereas if you go spar in a boxing gym where you don't know anybody, it's scary. You know, there's a fear there. There's a fear in the unknown. So I'd say if people want to replicate the feeling of fighting, the feeling of fighting is the feeling of the unknown because there are so many variables. Go to a club where you don't know anybody, on the other side of town, maybe the rough side of town. Go do some sparring with some tough dudes, and that will give you proper fear, because only real pain can give you real fear, or the possibility of real pain, the potential of pain. That's the only thing that's going to trigger the, oh, I could get hurt here. I think when it comes to things like professional violence, like becoming a doorman, one of the problems is it's not really suitable for civilian self-defense. This is why I also disagree with a lot of systems that come from the police or the military. And the same with doormen. There's nearly always one doorman or police officer or soldier. They nearly always have kit and equipment. They nearly always have backup. They're nearly always sober compared to the people they're fighting. They're nearly always better trained than the people they're fighting. They're nearly always more physically imposing than the people they're fighting. So whilst there is validity in what they do, all of their attributes are very high compared to their competition. You know, as a bouncer, that there's 3 other bouncers that's going to jump into this fight, and they're all tough guys. You know, if it's just you and your mom and your child at the supermarket, you don't have any of those luxuries. I think some of the best self-defense and self-protection advice training you can get is working with normal people in places like hospitals, schools, you know, working with the homeless at food banks and shelters, things like that, because you get to see what it's like for a normal person. And that's important. You know, you can learn a lot more about controlling someone by seeing a very good teacher, seeing a very good emergency services nurse, a paramedic. You know, they handle drugs, they handle drunk people, violent people. They don't have to have all the physical tools, but, you know, verbally, they can work a person, they can hack their mind and stop them being aggressive or diffuse. You know, if there's any good experience you want, it's potentially going out and doing some work with the homeless or in hospitals or places like that. You can pick up a lot more skills than going to the toughest bouncers and maybe being one of them for a couple of months. Because I think you get a biased fictional version of reality where you've always got tough guys, you've always got backup, you've always got equipment, and that's just not true.
Right. So would you say that that could also lead to a negative outcome? Like, there was a video of a guy that was going on, I think a few years ago. He was doing something similar to that, where he would go to boxing gyms and he would say he wants to spar, but in actuality, he would like just run in and just start like, attacking the person before they're able to be ready and, get able to get ready. And then he would say like he won, or say like they're mistreating him or something, or they're not real fighters, like that. Would you say that that type of mindset could give way to something like that? Or would you still, stand behind the idea that, sparring with those skilled individuals would still be a good way to test it?
Yeah, sparring with skilled individuals, the main thing is communication. If you walk into a gym, people are going to be a bit suspicious of you. Whereas if you email the coach in advance and say, look, I'm a karate dude, I've not really taken that many punches to the face, I'd like to do a couple of rounds with some of you guys, just to get a feel. Is that okay? Most reasonable coaches, most people that do martial arts and martial sports are nice, respectable people, and they will help you if they can. And I think as long as you've got clear communication, so everyone knows what's going on, you're always pretty safe. They'll put you with a decent middleweight that knows what he's doing.
Okay.
He knows that you're a karate guy. You might not have done much boxing before. So he's, any reasonable human being is going to act reasonably with you. I think you have to give people the benefit of the doubt, but clear communication about what you want from it is best for all parties. So if you want a bit of experience of being hit or beaten up, or, if you go to a BJJ club and say, I've not really experienced being attacked on the ground, could you give me a taste of it?
Right.
They know exactly what they need to do to serve you, to help you. So that's where, you can help people be a better uke, or you can be a better uke if you set expectations. And I think that's something that the martial arts isn't very good at, saying what your expectations are and saying what you might need. A lot of people feel embarrassed about saying what they want or they need, or they're too generalistic. They say, I just want a bit of experience. The more specific you are, the better service you'll get from other practitioners.
I see. So this is actually a quite, I guess, kind of follows into this. So do you feel that Bartitsu, in the way that it's created, or the way that it is in its current state now, still does really answer the question of how to handle aggression in like modern self-defense situations?
Yes, because it can't possibly not, because of what it's made from. So if you're doing Bartitsu, you have to box, you have to wrestle, you have to do judo, jiu-jitsu, you have to be able to use weapons. And if you're not able in those areas, then you're not doing Bartitsu. And so, you are familiar then with all ranges of conflict.
Right.
Where the gaps are, and there are gaps in all systems, is in the soft skills, the communication, the deception, the dialogue, understanding of self-defense and the law. And these are all things that, good martial artists should pick up and add to their repertoire anyway.
Right.
But absolutely, I fundamentally believe that Bartitsu done well, and in the spirit of its origins, is very, very practicable for self-defense, because that's its only job. Its only job is to take, and unlike a lot of modern reality systems, we know that all combat sports work. So if we know they all work, there's no argument for putting them together and using them for self-defense, because everything's been tested, everything's been shortlisted. It's the minimum. The boxing 6 punches are the minimum viable product of very good, strong punches you can throw. If you want to learn to punch, you speak to boxers. You want to learn to kick in a combative sense, you'd speak to the Thai boxers. There's some things where you go, these are the guys. You want to leg locks, the sambo guys, that's their jam. So go to the subject matter experts, get the stuff, bring it away. But I think that everyone can defend themselves with any system. So I don't see, I've never yet seen a system where people can't pull it off if they're talented. An example of why sometimes military or police systems have a bit of a problem, in that whilst they are effective, they're often deployed by predominantly young men that are very fit between the ages of 18 and 30. Now, young men that are very fit between the ages of 18 and 30 could pull off any system in the world, because they're big enough, strong enough, aggressive enough. you could teach them all Bajiquan, or you could teach them, you could teach them the softest internal Chinese art, and they'll still be able to bash people up because their attributes are at such a level.
For it. Right.
Yeah. So I think you must always look at the long term, the long game in this. In that, yes, it works when I'm young. Will it work in 10 years? Will it work in 15? Will it work in 20? And that's smart self-defense. Too many people worry about being imminently attacked. But if you live in a first world country, you're not really. If you're about to be imminently attacked, call the police. Very few people have to go around with a continuous sense of dread that they're going to be attacked. It's not hugely likely for most people in most of the world. So people feel like they need to toss things away if it takes a couple of years to learn. And that's a sad byproduct. Some things are worth investing the time in. And it's got to a point where people say, oh, well, if I can't learn it in a weekend, it's superfluous.
Right.
But only if you're going to get attacked next weekend.
Right.
Yeah, but to that boxer or kickboxer that spent 5 years just becoming very good at everything, it's brilliant. So unless you've got a very obvious immediate threat to your life, take the time you need to learn the arts you need. I think that's something which modern martial thinking doesn't really address that well.
And I totally agree on that. That's one thing that I learned actually in my own aspect of just studying and understanding like the martial arts in the way that I do. I come from a Wing Chun background, so Wing Chun, boxing. I trained karate with Manny for quite a while, kickboxing with Manny. So a lot of my my knowledge is very striking based. So just noticing how when I first met Manny, I was a very like traditional martial arts, like very like flowery, utilizing the motions kind of person. But then after a few years of training under Manny, competing and such, I understood that one of the things that traditional martial arts tend to lose is that pressure testing, that modernization of the art, which I feel leaves a lot of traditional guys out in the cold. Not saying that traditional martial arts is useless, because I come from a traditional background, you come from a traditional background, but it's very that lack of really pressure testing what you're doing, it really takes away from that understanding that you can have. And I don't know if we'll have enough time for it, but I actually had a question. Well, actually, I'll try to ask, and I think this will be the last one. In terms of composite arts, usually there's like one art that holds everything together. For example, for JKD, Wing Chun was like the springboard that allowed Bruce Lee to like kind of open up and fold into all of the arts that he did, which created what we now know as like traditional Jeet Kune Do. So for the sake for Bartitsu, I know it's as you said also, it's a composite art that didn't really have I guess a very long history, but I'd say within its foundations, what would you say in your opinion was the art that kind of is the glue to Bartitsu? Like, what is the art that everything kind of leads back to, in your opinion?
I would say that predominantly it's the Japanese jiu-jitsu element, the itsu in Bartitsu, because there's some Japanese words that I'm about to butcher. I'm assuming you're fluent in Japanese.
I'm conversational, intermediate. I probably say Manny's probably better than I am, but we both have had experience living and stuff in Japan. So don't worry about the language. We'll know what you mean.
Are Japanese people still pretending to not understand you and speaking to you in English?
I've had instances where that's come up, but when I was living in Japan, I primarily used my Japanese more often. So I mean, I'd run into the, oh my goodness, your Japanese is really good, and it's like, oh yeah, it's all right, it's there. But I'd say I'm pretty decent with it now, still, having not been to Japan in quite a while.
I always find, that like, I know what I've just said. I know you
You reacted.
So I would say that jiu-jitsu is the piece, because the foundation of Bartitsu is kind of three phases. There's kazushi, the unbalancing. Now, the unbalancing when you talk to most people in martial arts, you say kazushi, they think of the physical, the pull and the push, the judo, you know, I twist and pull, I step and you step back, that physical and balancing. But in reality, that kazushi can be emotional. It can be verbal. You know, to disrupt or unbalance someone isn't just the physical act. It's asking a distracting question, standing in an awkward way, getting closer than they thought you could be, being further away. You know, there's so many ways you can disrupt the mind of a person. So kazushi, then sukiri, to enter. And that's typically where your striking elements from boxing and savate come in, because that's a weaker area of jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu does have a temiwaza, but let's be honest, it's a weak area of jiu-jitsu. You know, jiu-jitsu guys aren't known for being phenomenal strikers. So that's where, you know, if you can come in with some decent shots from boxing and savate, it's probably going to be more ruggedized than, say, your average shuto strike from a jiu-jitsuka, because that's not their main jam. That's not what they spend most of their time doing. And then kake, the execution, the finish. And that's where the jiu-jitsu bit comes into its play, because typically a Bartitsu sequence will start with a disruption, move on to an entrance, a ballistic entry, like a strike, like a punch, whatever, and then finish with a throw or a slam or a lock. And that's the kake, that's the finishing. So the end of most Bartitsu is jiu-jitsu. And so that's, you know, that's where it kind of, the bread and butter of the system lies. But you can't apply that technique unless you've done it in such a ballistic way. There's a great Gracie quote, which I like. And the quote is this. So Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And it's, if you take a black belt and you punch him in the face, he becomes a brown belt. You punch him in the face again, he becomes a purple belt. You punch him in the face again, he becomes a blue belt. The idea being that if someone has high dominance in a field like grappling, you need those percussive skills to stand a chance in that grappling exchange. Otherwise, you're relying on parity of skills, my grappling versus your grappling. In a composite art, it's rock, paper, scissors. If I know you've got the best rock, I need the best paper. If you've got the best scissors, I need the best rock. You know, it's dynamic problem solving. And in a composite art, you've got a rock, a paper, and some scissors to play with. Whereas otherwise, let's say you just do judo or you just do boxing, you've just got a big rock or some big scissors, and that's it. So, you know, I find the rock, paper, scissors analogy the best way to explain the benefits of composite arts to people, in that it gives you the options to win. Which otherwise you're relying on your skill or your attributes, whereas another art could have been that secret little extra thing you needed, you know,
that strategic planning.
That little knowledge of Wing Chun might give you a little bit extra when you're boxing. You know, you might hold out that mansal just a little bit longer and then throw in your cross, which a boxer might not have normally done, and you can only have access that by having paper or scissors in your pocket. I think that's the important thing. So yes, jiu-jitsu holds it all together traditionally, because that's what most sequences finish with, but it is composite, and all composite things are stronger than single things. A composite bow is stronger than a single bow. You know, every composite metals, everything that's made of more than one thing or more than one flavor is typically better. But that said, most people will have a specialism. So most people in Bartitsu will come at it being a good judoka or a good boxer or a good stick fighter. But that's cool. That will always happen. In the same way that in every karate club, there'll be some guys that are better punching, some better kicking, you know, some are better grappling. It's just that is life. But for me, you know, it's a valid system for self-defense. It's an interesting look into the past and martial heritage. And it's got some very valid answers to today's defense questions, which I like.
Beautiful, beautiful. Very, very well said. And with that, we actually are winding down to the end of this interview. But one last thing, do you have is there anything that you'd like to say to our viewers? Any lasting advice? Or please feel free to also plug your page as well on YouTube if you'd like.
Yeah. So for me, I love martial arts. If you would like, I've got a YouTube channel called the BartitsuLab. There are hundreds of videos on there. They're typically long. So, you know, I don't make money from this. They're long, they're in depth. They're meant for people that are serious about this stuff and want to add some extra skills. So if you like that kind of thing, you won't see flashy demos. but you'll see useful stuff, and it's all free. So go there and have a look. I've got 2 books if people are interested. One called Modern Bartitsu, which is about Bartitsu, and one which is based on the combative systems of World War II from William Fairbairn. And both of those can be found on Amazon. If you type in Tommy Joe Moore or Modern Bartitsu, you'll find it. But my main advice would be just go out there and train. Go out there and message people. Find good martial artists you like that you do not know, and go say hello and go train, because martial artists are typically very nice people, and they're very accommodating. But unless you go out there and put yourself in their way and say, I would love to do something with you, I've got 90 minutes, could we do some stuff? You'll never get that experience. So I'd say, be brave, even if you're shy, socially awkward, think you're too low of a rank, think you're a nobody, whatever. Speak to any good martial artist and they will give you the time of day. So go experiment and play with other people, because that's how we get better. If we are composite martial artists, we learn something from everyone we meet. So go meet as many people as possible before you die.
and on that note, thank you very much, Tommy, for your time. Everybody, like you said, please make sure to go YouTube the BartitsuLab. I've seen the videos. They are fantastic, especially one called Take the Throat. If you're a Wing Chun guy, please feel free to go see that one as well. In particular, you might learn something new about yourself. Other than that, thank you very much, everybody. We're looking forward to talking to you guys again. Thank you, Tommy. And thank you all. If you like what you saw today, please feel free to like and subscribe at the bottom, leave a comment, and we'll be more than happy to answer you. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.